Good afternoon and welcome to the 133rd of the COVID calls. This is a daily discussion of the COVID 19 pandemic with a diverse collection of disaster experts. My name is Scott Gabriel Knowles. I'm a historian of disasters at Drexel University in Philadelphia. Today is the second of my teaching COVID 19 sessions. Today I'm talking with Sarah Raskin and Nicole Welk-Yeager. Just a reminder, you can catch COVID Calls live every weekday at 5 p.m. Eastern Time on YouTube. Just go to the COVID Calls YouTube channel to watch. You can also catch COVID Calls on Facebook Live and also on Periscope. You can hear COVID Calls anytime, recorded as podcasts on Spotify, iTunes, Podbean, or anywhere you get podcasts. You can also keep up with COVID Calls via Twitter using the handle @US of Disaster or @COVID Calls. Please do help spread the word and send suggestions for future guests and topics, and please feel free to suggest yourself as a future guest. As of today, September 23rd, 2020, there are 31,728,021 confirmed cases of COVID-19 globally, according to the Johns Hopkins University Coronavirus Resource Center. That's up from 31,433,180 yesterday. 6,921,817 of those are in the United States. So that's up from 6,882,969 yesterday. There are now a total of 201,459 deaths from COVID-19 reported in the United States, up from 200,477 reported yesterday, another day with 1,000 deaths day to day. As a way to bring some humanity to the numbers, I've been reading a life story or a story of advocacy for those impacted by the pandemic, and I'd like to continue that now. The headline: he worked as a janitor at the university where he was studying. He died from coronavirus just 20 credits shy of graduating. This is by Katia Goba. This appeared in BuzzFeed April 28th. Darren Adams made a living cleaning the halls of Wayne State University in Detroit. As a custodian there for 6 years, he helped keep the school tidy, but he was also there to make a new life for himself. The 54-year-old had spent several stints in prison on theft and drug offenses, according to his fiancée, Regine Woolfolk. But Adams was determined to turn his life around. After a couple of years working at the school, he enrolled himself in 2016. He chose to major in sociology, pursuing a Bachelor of Arts degree. Eager to learn, he sat in the front row of his classes, dressed in the college's sports swag. He asked nuanced questions and spoke poignantly about issues of race. He had a 3.64 GPA. The university said he was an all-star student. For Adams, this new beginning was sacred. He made a pact with God that if he got out this time, he would make changes and wouldn't go back to prison, Woolfolk told BuzzFeed News. Adams, though, was not able to finish his dream. His story of redemption ended on April 3rd when he died after nearly a month of having COVID-19 symptoms, the disease caused by the novel coronavirus. He was just 20 credits shy of graduating. Wayne State University officials announced Adams would be posthumously awarded his bachelor's degree. Adams's commitment to his education and community will be remembered and missed, officials said. Adams first began to experience symptoms on March 13th. 3 days later, he and his fiancée, with whom he shared a home, came down with fevers, his at 102, hers at 101. The couple sought help. They made 2 separate trips to urgent care. We had a hard time because nobody would let us in because we had fevers, said Woolfolk, who also tested positive for COVID-19 and was awaiting, at the time the story came out, was awaiting results after quarantining for nearly a month. After landing at the Ascension Providence Hospital emergency room, each of them tested negative for the flu. They were given antibiotics and instructed to quarantine, according to Woolfolk. It was crippling, she said. Our bodies were aching, we were sweating, we had fevers, we couldn't eat, and the Z-Paks weren't doing it. So I said, we got to go back and find out what's going on. That's when I started getting worried. I'd never felt like this before. 2 days later, the couple returned to the hospital. During this trip, Adams was diagnosed with double pneumonia and sent home with a prescription for an inhaler and other medications. The comments on his discharge papers noted worsening conditions, according to documents BuzzFeed News reviewed. Woolfolk said Adams had a history of bronchitis and asthma. I just watched him decline, said Wolfork. I mean, I was sick too, but not as sick as he was because he was having problems breathing. She said her fiance struggled to find a comfortable resting position because of his respiratory complications. He finally resigned himself to sleeping on the living room sofa where he'd lay until March 23rd, 5:30 in the morning when emergency services knocked on the door, responding to his call. They didn't even come inside because they said they couldn't get contaminated or whatever, Wolfork said. So Adams walked outside of his one family house and down 2 steps from his porch. He was put on a stretcher and admitted to Sinai Grace Hospital. That was the last time I saw him, said Wolfork. The same day, Michigan Governor Gretchen Whitmer directed all non essential businesses to close and signed a statewide stay at home order, which went into effect on March 24th at midnight. Adams died some 10 days later. Friends and family members characterized Adams as a hard worker, a jokester, and someone who loved to dance. He always repped the men in the dance battles, his cousin Daryl Franklin told BuzzFeed News. He was the life of the party. When he came into the room, he was like a ball of energy, Wolfork said of her fiance, who was affectionately called Red by friends and family. Adams was also a member of the AmeriCorps Urban Safety Program, working to increase public safety throughout his city. As part of the initiative, he helped board up more than 200 abandoned homes, many of which line routes that children in Detroit walk each day to get to school. Adams is survived by his own 2 children, a daughter, Layla, 17, and son, Darren, 33, as well as his fiance and 4 siblings. He was a good person who wanted to leave a mark on the world, said Wolfork, and he has done just that. Okay, let's turn to our conversation for today. So happy to have my guests, and let me introduce them. Nicole Welk-Yeager is an interdisciplinary historian trained in the history of science, technology, and medicine, as well as anthropology. Her research focuses on human-animal relationships, particularly those that influence health and welfare, as they're broadly construed and constantly redefined by agricultural and medical industries. She's currently a postdoctoral teaching fellow at North Carolina State University, and she's teaching courses in U.S. history, agricultural history, and history of science. Sarah Raskin is a medical anthropologist and assistant professor in the L. Douglas Wilder School of Government and Public Affairs at the Virginia Commonwealth University. She draws on her knowledge as a former public health practitioner at local and federal levels to teach urban health, public health emergency preparedness, and health policy across undergraduate and graduate levels. A self-described oral health equity evangelist and passionate Appalachianist, Sarah collaborates with a multidisciplinary team that investigates dental disparities and identifies policy and practice-based solutions to drive oral health equity in close relationship with community partners across the state. She's also a mom and aunt to elementary school-aged kids who are probably like yours, listening, getting through Zoom lessons, one Zoom at a time. That's from her bio, and I absolutely love that line. And I want to thank you both for coming, and welcome Nicole and Sarah. Thanks for coming on COVID Calls.
Thank you for having us.
So I'd like to start the way I usually do, which is just to find out where you're calling from and what the pandemic situation is looking like there. Sarah, can I start with you, please?
Sure. So thanks for having me. I live primarily in Washington, D.C., where, the pandemic situation looks like all Zoom school for now. Restaurants and bars and some businesses are open. There is indication that we'll be moving into a better phase of reopening soon, but there's also a lot of critique because there's been some identification of dubious numbers so far as openings and closings. And so I guess my best answer is I don't know how it looks because data is challenging.
And as far as your students, what's the situation in terms of return to classroom?
Yes. So actually, I'm appointed at a university in Richmond, Virginia. So I'm under typical circumstances in Richmond about a third of the time. VCU did go ahead and have some on-campus courses this semester. I'm teaching all online. They had some cases quite early as soon as they opened back up, including one cluster. There were a number of critiques of how that was handled. And so there's more of a focus on surveillance right now, self-report, symptoms, that kind of thing. And as I understand it, some courses went online from the classrooms, but not being there on the ground. What I can tell you is that the students in my classrooms are almost entirely taking all their courses online right now.
You know, for people who are in the greater DC area, I mean, you're always getting a lesson in federalism there, I guess, every single day, but you're seeing close at hand how the district has handled this, how Maryland has handled this, and how Virginia has handled it. And it hasn't all been in sync, has it?
No, no. And even like kind of sub-regionally across that, I would say that there's more sync across the three units, since we're not all states, than there maybe have been in other regions. So I'm thinking here about differences between like Kentucky and Tennessee.
Right.
But certainly there have been some distinctions. And actually, you know, federalism is a major theme of my policy course. So how federalism is playing out in the pandemic, but also even regionalism within states. So Virginia is a great case example of that, wherein mayors and county leaders for a number of hotspots actually asked the governor to slow the reopening plans. And there was an initial agreement with that. And then subsequently, there was a lot of resistance at the state level, at the Commonwealth level, to slow reopening plans, even as hotspots were continuing in Northern Virginia, in Richmond, in the Hampton Roads area. Conversely, I'm literally looking across the border at Maryland right now. And I'm fascinated by how Maryland has in some ways really had tremendous leadership, including interacting at the international sphere, which kind of supersedes, federal policymaking. So with your question, you open up a whole can of thoughts, but it's a very pertinent question.
Right. And with a Republican governor in Maryland. Yeah, interesting. Okay. Well, I'm sure we will return to federalism as we hear more about your teaching at this time. Nicole, same question to you. Where are you calling from and how's it looking there today?
Yeah, I'm calling in from Raleigh, North Carolina, and it's constantly fluctuating here. But as I go outside, most people don't wear masks. It's quite different approach to the pandemic. In North Carolina State, we're all online right now. They tried staying open in the beginning, and some of us were allowed to have online courses. Many of us had hybrid, and they all went online after 2 weeks. As we're moving forward, we actually just got an email today that they're going to try to reopen in the spring, face-to-face teaching. And it was interesting because through that email at the very end of it, they were saying that it was much more contained. Surveillance, really important part and talking point in that email. They also said that it was spreading because of parties, not from classrooms. So they had a very distinct differentiation between how it was spreading and what kind of social interactions were spreading coronavirus. So that I found that really fascinating, and it seems to be a debate that's happening within the universities down here. We'll see. I recommended to have online classes for my spring course load, so we'll see how it goes.
What's the upshot? I mean, I've heard this at other universities as well. The upshot of making that observation that the students are catching this and spreading it at social events. I mean, presumably they still have to come. If your notion is they're going to come to class, then they either have to choose to come to class and not party, or party and not come to class. So there's something that doesn't add up here for me.
Yeah, I think this is a big moment for many universities, and speaking to what is the role of the university? Why do we have a college? Is it for the experience? Is it for students to live on campus and have that experience? Or is it to get a degree and have a certain type of classroom curricula learning around that? And it's certainly both, but I think because there seems to be this, you have to choose one or the other. I think a lot of universities are going to be asking this in the next few months.
Well, this is the topic for today. We're continuing a great discussion I had a couple of weeks ago about teaching COVID-19 as a subject in the midst of an ongoing pandemic. And just thrilled you're both willing to share your teaching experiences. I want to start with a kind of a general question just about you. And Nicole, let me start with you on this. I've asked several people this question. If you're a person who studies public health, history of medicine, disasters, and you're teaching it, and it's happening all simultaneously, it's an uncanny experience. It's hard to characterize, I think. And I just wonder how you've been processing that, to live with it and to go through the steps you need to every day to protect yourself, your family, your colleagues, your community, your students, but then also somehow take some part of your brain aside and say, now this is the objective time in which I analyze this world in which I'm living. How do you think about that?
Yeah, this is a good question and almost an impossible question to answer too because of the uncanniness. But for me, I guess I have to go back to when it was happening in the spring and what that was like. For me, sorry, I just got a phone call on my watch. When we were getting the first news of what was going on in Wuhan, China in January, I mentioned it to my students in my history of public health class, like, oh, this is something that we want to keep in mind and be aware of as we're moving forward. And we went through a unit on epidemics, and then we kept on moving forward. And then we got to February, and it really just kind of hit me, and it hit the students as well, that we are living in the moment that we are studying simultaneously. Like, we're looking in the past, we're looking at case studies in the past. No, we're not understanding medicine the same way as those in the early 19th century. But boy, it was just seeing everyone kind of reorient the critical gaze on themselves. And as someone who's trained in history and anthropology, I just kept on thinking reflexivity. Like, we're in this, we have to recontextualize ourselves. So I think when it really hit me is when we were going through an exercise in class, and I asked them, if you're a librarian and you're working with a historian 30 years in the future, what's the one source that you would give a researcher studying this to understand what's going on in this moment? And they love that question, but it also relayed to me that we are constantly creating primary sources. And so it's important for us to have conversations like this in a public sphere that's available to other people, understand that the technology in the future might not be able to provide the information that we're giving on Twitter and social media. It's a lot of information. It's a lot of data. It's overwhelming for the students. I think it's overwhelming for us as well. But in knowing that, just for me, I like to journal and to write things down on paper, pen and paper, of these moments, and just reflecting, we're making primary sources, and that transparency that we're all in this together has been something that keeps me oriented to this uncanny moment.
Mm-hmm. What was your answer to your own question? What's the one source that you would hand down to the archivist 30 years from now? I'm often amazed. I ask this question only half in jest, because I catch myself sometimes asking very hard questions of students, and then I'm like, wait a minute, I should probably know the answer to that before I ask. But we can't always wait to know the answer to ask a great question, right?
No, and I think it changes every day. we get this new.
Of course.
It's like, do I want to give a source of January to March coronavirus or something later? And I think in the very beginning, they had these TikTok style videos, this competition for dances for people to wash their hands, and all these jingles and these radio shows going, here's 20 seconds of music, so you know the 20 seconds to wash your hands. That is probably what I would give.
Well, Sarah, let me ask you the same question. Thank you, Nicole. Just the sort of your experience through this time, and particularly this issue of events catching up with you and catching up with things you study that are, in non-disaster time, and all of a sudden we're in disaster time, and you're both living, surviving, and teaching.
Yes, thank you for asking. So, a couple of different thoughts that are kind of scattershot, which probably also reflects my experience at the moment. I finally landed on this phrase not long ago, which is that this moment is full of the contradiction of both being too much and not enough, right? So for people like us, I'm going to make a guess that you are kind of overwhelmed with thought, with potential archives, with analysis, with Twitter connections. layer on top, either your kids on Zoom school for 8 hours a day or your kids on Zoom school for like a half an hour a day, and then you got to fill in the rest. There's something about this like too much and yet also like not enough. And so I'm thinking, not enough relief, not enough of a coordinated federal response for people who have unfortunately lost their jobs, too much time on their hands, not enough kind of things to like move forward and in a way that keeps focus in that positive way that just kind of doing something can feel good. And so I'm having this very, like, to be academic about it, this very Janus-faced experience of the moment. And I think it really is what I hear reflected among people in, my family, my colleagues, my peer community. But I also kind of want to layer on that it's not just the pandemic, right? So it's the pandemic. It is also the election year. It is also the police involved, or the police violence against Black people and protesters. And it is also, the protests in the street, et cetera. And so there's kind of now, RBG's death and like what's happening with that. There's this whole kind of coalescing of catastrophes. And I kind of jokingly tweeted the other week that I took my daughter and my niece to see Black Panther for the first time ever on Black Lives Matter Plaza in DC. They had never seen a superhero movie before. They both, are kind of young and are scared of violence, understandably. And I was like, one day we're going to tell their grandkids that like they saw this movie for the first time ever in this moment, in this space, in this year. And it kind of feels like every day is like that. And that is crushing in the weight of it for sure. It also feels a little bit like a calling to put ourselves, our bodies, our money, our scholarship where our philosophical and ethical commitments are. And so yeah, I guess that's my response.
So just to remind folks you're listening to COVID Calls, we're talking about teaching COVID-19 and the experience of educators at this time with Nicole Welch-Yeager and Sarah Raskin. Sarah, let me stay with you and ask you kind of a specific question about the courses you've been teaching, and then we can turn to sort of broader discussion about materials and how you interrelate with students. But I know you've been teaching a COVID-19 policy course, and you've also been teaching a public health emergency preparedness course. The second one, I presume, is one you teach of longstanding. The first one is not one you would have taught before, I presume. Can you tell us a little bit about just these courses, who takes them, your approach?
Sure. Yeah, thank you. So I have taught for a couple of years public health emergency preparedness, which is an online course delivered in the master's program at the Wilder School to students enrolled in the Homeland Security and Emergency Preparedness program. These are many of them. In fact, I think all of them are professionals who are improving their skills. So they will go on to continue being practitioners, firefighters, clinicians, emergency managers, National Guards people, you name it. I have taught it from a very conventional for disaster type perspective for a couple of years. I weave in some of my personal ethical commitments around things like public health emergency ethics, the social determinants of health, racism. And so I weave those thematic areas in, but it's very much like a for disaster typology course and a real nuts and bolts skills course. I was teaching it last semester when the pandemic began. And as you can imagine, we were trying to get through the course content that is about the non-pandemic topics while also really tracking on the pandemic very closely. And it just so happened that enrolled in the course, we had a infectious disease doc who was completing an MPH. And so she had been tracking this very early. We also had a National Guards person who was kind of on the front end of being called up in terms of logistics. And then we actually had the director of the emergency medicine department at VCU Health Systems. And so we were actually having this fascinating, like real-time conversation. Oh, and we had some EMTs. It was an unbelievable opportunity. And in some ways, it was the opportunity for them to talk in a way that they couldn't in their respective organizations because they aren't ever really in the same room. Obviously, this course will change moving forward, so I have to think about that. And then our dean, Susan Gooden, asked me late in the spring to teach a pandemic policy course. That's a graduate seminar. It is cross-listed across our doctoral program and our master's in public administration. And then I also have students from the MSW and MPH programs. And she really left it to me how I wanted to teach it. And so my approach is really to look at different content areas each week. So, across the range. So kind of the original policy concern of, testing, surveillance, case definitions, all that stuff, on through, basic living needs, housing, the CARES Act, et cetera, on through health services. And then I actually, having moved through as we're moving through all these different areas of policy consideration, it occurred to me that we need to end this semester kind of feeling good because, days are getting shorter, weather's getting colder. So in the last few weeks, we're actually going to spend some time in speculative fiction and Afrofuturism to imagine a world beyond the situation right now and think about how policy can be influenced by a belief in a better future world.
So these students are public policy students, graduate students mostly, and some undergraduates, or mostly graduate students?
All grad students. And again, like a lot of practitioners. So we have students who are coming in from working in the health department, who are coming in from being like, social workers in clinical settings. So, yeah.
One of the things that really strikes me about that you described, it sounds like it's going to happen in both classes, is your own comfort with allowing who's in the room to perhaps shift the pedagogy a little bit, to allow things to go off of that, whatever script you had coming in. Not all faculty can do that easily. It's hard, I think, for some, people spend a lot of time planning, in some cases, every minute of what happens in a college course. I know I took some courses like that as an undergraduate, and I really appreciated that. But at the same time, it might not leave the kind of space to do what you're describing. Just to throw one thing out, after September 11, I had the chance, I taught at John Jay College at that time in New York, and part of CUNY, and I partnered with Charles Strozier, another historian, and we taught a course about September 11. We taught it in 2004, and then we taught it again in 2010. We taught it 3 times in a 7-year span. And that first one was still close enough to 9/11. And John Jay is a university that has a lot of people who do policy, a lot of firefighters, a lot of police, a lot of people from other countries who are police and come and take a degree. And something clicked just when you were talking, which is that a lot of times what we had planned for any given day had to be given up because the room became a sort of virtual expository of the different experiences that people had had, EMTs, cops, whatever. It didn't click to me quite that that's what we were doing until you just said that.
I appreciate that. And if it's okay if I kind of respond to that with something I thought maybe I'd talk about at a different point. So I'm a second career academic. I was a public health practitioner for years. And so that means that I'm not even yet tenured. I am 10 years older than your average first year, second or third year faculty member. And I actually find that freeing in this moment because I feel that I'm able to take risks and be brave and be vulnerable in the classroom as a result of the present moment, kind of weaving together these multiple disasters that maybe I wouldn't have felt at a different time in my life. And I think, I have to respond to these students' lives because their lives are their real lives. Many of them have children. Many of them are first gen. Some of them are undocumented. They are then going out into their careers and carrying forth what they learn in the classroom. And so if I'm not modeling it, I don't feel that I'm doing right by them. And if that is a risk too great for my career, then that, I guess, is something I'll live with the consequences of. But it just feels like an essential authenticity to me right now. And I'll be glad to answer more nuts and bolts questions about what does that mean for grading and stuff later. But I want to get out of the way and let Nicole, jump in as well.
Yeah, Nicole, same question. And you've had this has been a year on the move for you. So you've been teaching in at least 2 states by my count, and I was interested to talk with you about what that experience was like, but then also just like what classes have you been teaching and what are you preparing to teach right now?
Yeah, so being someone in transition, and then yeah, speaking to like the experience of coronavirus, going back to your first question, I defended my dissertation this year. And so that itself was a layer of experience that I then take as an instructor in the classroom as I'm looking at students to complete their projects, sometimes large projects via Zoom, via online delivery, and that's a challenge and something I reflect on a lot. But speaking to the question at hand,
just
can you just
what
repeat
what
it again?
classes have
I
you been
lost it while
teaching
we
during
were
this
talking
time?
to Sarah.
And just to make a note
Yeah.
of it, that you have not been at NC State throughout this whole time, but you've been at other institutions as well.
Yeah, so I was at Drexel University, and then I was also at Franklin and Marshall College, which is in Lancaster County, for those who are unfamiliar. Drexel's in Philadelphia, and then moving to NC State once I accepted the position down here. At Drexel, I taught history of public health. Drexel has quarters, and so I did the winter quarter of history of public health. And that ended the same week that the university wasn't sure they were shutting down. So we ended up having the finals remotely, but I was able to have all of the class in person. And then I worked with Michael Udell, and we recreated, redesigned the course for online delivery, asynchronous online delivery, and that was tough. That was something that the course itself lends itself to discussion. And Sarah, I'd be really interested to hear how getting that interpersonal discussion started and really fostering that in an online setting has been really difficult for me. It's easier in smaller classes, but I went from having a 45-person class teaching history of public health at Drexel and very small 10-person classes at Franklin and Marshall College teaching environment and human values and science and religion, to then coming to NC State with 70, 80-person class, almost an 80-person class, teaching U.S. agricultural history.
Mm-hmm.
And to me, all of the courses cross-cut each other in these really glorious and also terrifying ways when thinking also about the pandemic that we're living in at hand. And so I had a very strange experience that I don't think a lot of people had, going from in person for the whole pandemic to totally online. I didn't have to do that transition. And then preparing to go to a large state school and being like, for a US Ag course, does coronavirus fit into this? Does my public health interest fit into this? And absolutely it does. I started the course with them reading Kate Brown's The Coronavirus Pandemic is Not Natural, or It's Not a Natural Pandemic. And the students loved that reading. And it just was very provocative. I have a lot of agriculture students in the class. I have a lot of farmers in the class. Now that it's all online, some of them have already told me they go out to the barn, they come back in, and they tune in. So it's, I'm teaching a very different demographic of students than I did in my history of public health courses, which were much more undergrads who are interested in public health policy and also possibly being pre-med, and now being with a whole bunch of, they call them Aggies here at NC State, and being a first generation farm student myself in the past, now integrating all of these sources together in a conversation about food production today. It's been a wild ride. It's also a story of what it's like to be contingent faculty and to move about and move around and use different skills and transfer them in different ways. And to be able to sustain a narrative across courses that illustrates, I think, an importance in flexibility that Sarah was talking about in designing a course, but then also letting students kind of lead it based on their interests and their backgrounds.
I've just put up on the screen here a link to this New Yorker piece that you mentioned, Nicole, the Kate Brown, the historian at MIT, who wrote this piece called "The Pandemic is Not a Natural Disaster." Really great piece. And it's interesting, the perspective you've had is probably one that we haven't heard enough about contingent faculty who may be teaching. I mentioned John Jay College earlier. When I was there were faculty who teaching at 3 or 4, I think they may have put a limit in now, but multiple different CUNY campuses they're shuttling back and forth. I mean, this is the experience of higher education for many, many instructors, way too many instructors these days. But you've framed it slightly differently in that you were interested to see if the material you wanted to cover, how it would catch with different populations. And I can't imagine a more different population than the Drexel University student and the NC State student. Your average Drexel student is not going out to the barn and then coming in. And I wonder if you could say a little bit more about that, and maybe even you named one specific material, the New Yorker piece, but other kinds of, let's get into, assignments and assessments and things like that a little bit that you found have caught. Maybe they've caught differently with different students, but that they've worked for you. Nicole, let me ask you that first, and then Sarah, I want to ask you the same question.
Yeah, so I think for each instructor, it depends on the discipline, but one of the things I've noticed work really well and worked well and transferred between Drexel, Franklin and Marshall, and NC State, they're all very different institutions, was I had very open-ended short assignments throughout the course. And so they'd be almost weekly or bi-weekly, depending on the course, how long the course was. And I called them applied history exercises. And what they were primary source analysis, but relating them back to the present day and what's going on and contextualizing it within the given time period that they're having that source, but also how it relates to what we can learn from that for today's lessons. And I crafted them for different types of sources, but they work really well because a lot of them are a choose your own adventure kind of format where they get to choose the source that interests them and then write about it. It also works for various writing skill levels because they're only 200 to 500 word analyses. So I can kind of gauge where everyone's at before I then have them develop what has been working really well for me, also open-ended final projects. That can be podcasts, that can be video essays, that can be TikTok videos, and they're incredible. The students are so I don't call them students, I call them scholars in my class. These scholars have a wealth of information and creativity and skill sets that I think are not always tapped into when you're just focusing on the exam and written format. But opening that up was crucial and essential for me to be able to juggle this. It's hard to grade, I'll say that, with 70 students, but overall, I think that they've responded so well to the material and feel like they can own the course as their own and learn what they want to learn.
My experience in assigning, I've never tried to do TikTok. You'll have to teach me how to do that. I'm interested to use it, but I've used podcasts before with students, and it's not, I think there may be a sort of a sense of like, it's some new media thing, like this isn't a real, the skills that they have to do, they have to still do the research and the writing, but then they have to write a script and then figure out how to present a script and then do the technical elements. There's a lot going on there. And my experience is that it actually forced them into editing, to think about editing in ways that they might not have thought if it was merely a research paper. I don't know if you had similar experiences using sort of new media assignments, but I found them really, really demanding of students.
Very demanding, but they also put their energy in it because they're invested in it. I had one student this past public health history course, I'll just mention this really quickly and then we can go to Sarah. She is in design and architecture and designed a food truck museum based on the course, and it was just absolutely incredible. The drawing is beautiful, and she said I can share it and talk about it, so I don't feel
like
bad.
The quintessential Philadelphia project, right there.
It is. It really is. It was. It was really incredible, and I was just so like I think I gasped when I opened the file. Amazing. I couldn't believe it.
Yeah. Sarah, same question to you. You know, what kinds of, just to get down into the weeds a little bit about assignments, materials, particularly in a time in which, like that Kate Brown piece, great piece to use. I've been using Ed Yong's pieces in The Atlantic. They've been phenomenal. But then it's hard. I'm like, well, which one I'm going to use? Because my relationship to the first one he published is different now than it was when he published it, as you would expect in an unfolding disaster. We're still sense making. That makes material selection really challenging, doesn't it?
It's extraordinarily challenging. And, you know, like I was actually just thinking of the example of the continuing resolution that Pelosi and Mnuchin, you know, got through yesterday that's going to maintain, you know, food aid for people. And so what I assigned even for next week's reading 2 weeks ago when I loaded it into Canvas is now a little outdated. And so, you know, I think that to some degree, part of the management here that we have to talk about is grace for ourselves, because, you know, I really appreciate all of Nicole's comments, and they're very familiar to me as far as the kinds of assignments I'm doing. And part of that is grace for myself, because if I become sick, if my little kid becomes sick, or just like volume management, you know, I am not going to have the capacity to always be on top of every single thing. And so there's this kind of constant dynamic between myself and material. So I too lean on trusted sources, right? So like Alexis Madrigal's work, Andy Slavitt's podcast, you know, these kinds of things. I trust these experts to be focused almost full time on their particular lane. That does mean that I don't wind up assigning as much peer-reviewed literature as I would under usual circumstances, but that's okay with me, because a future iteration of this class, there will be plenty of room for that. Right now, I really think that high quality journalism is primarily where it's at, with some other peer-reviewed literature and, you know, reporting from different organizations. So that can be important material. I also try to really put a limit on how much I'm assigning, because I want to respect my students' experiences. You know, something that I am aware of is that there are faculty who I think in a bit of a panic about moving online have kind of doubled down on the hardness of the courses. Mm-hmm. I kind of hear that in the background, and kind of invoking a mutual aid ethos. I feel like if I feel comfortable with more flexibility to give, it frees up the students to spend more time on the stuff that they're really kind of scared of. And so I want to kind of go in two different really quick directions here, just to also get back to your original question. Mm-hmm. I have failed to mention that I have guest experts in almost every class. So I'm currently teaching an undergrad research methods course. It's really a design course for our urban planning students, and then a research design course. And then I'm teaching this graduate seminar. And in both of these courses, I figure no one wants to sit on Zoom for like 3 hours, which is like half listening to me blather on in some lecture, and like half, you know, small group work where like, you know, people don't really, you know, want to be there. And so I actually have lined up guest experts, many of whom I met through Twitter. So, you know, the unbelievable scholar Rhea Boyd was in our course last 2 weeks ago with my graduate students, talking about racism and the relationship between the pandemic and incarceration and children. You know, in a couple of weeks, we're going to have Amber Piat from Human Impact Partners. We had Beth Blauer from the Hopkins Coronavirus Resource Center. And so they come in for about an hour that is a combination of like what they want to say. And that is usually like the most current stuff that I have not managed to get into the Canvas board. And then the students like can ask questions. They can front load those questions on a discussion board. They can ask them live in the chat. And so really, you know, I have this kind of approach in which it's meant to be a conversation in every course between, I almost think of myself as like a curator or facilitator plus an actual expert plus the students. And then I do want to shift over to this question about assignments and whatnot. So I've been fascinated for a while about contract-based grading or labor-based grading, in which the students and I kind of propose what the semester will look like in terms of assignments, and we discuss early in the semester, and then they agree, and then we move forward with it. This semester in both of my courses, I've committed that really these assignments are as much about helping them keep a forward moving pace as they are about like capital Q quality. Like I trust them to be the best experts on their lives. If they are only able to move from a knowledge that would be on a scale from like a 4 to a 5.5, given the circumstances of their lives, that progress is meaningful not only because it demonstrates that their knowledge has improved, but also because it means that they have kept moving forward. And I think that's an important way to stave off some of the depression that I think we're really going to see kind of widespread in the fall and winter, as I've already mentioned, with days getting shorter, seasonal stuff as usual. And so for my undergrads, I have bite-sized assignments that are all focused around research methods. So And really, they are evaluated on quality completion, in which submitting an assignment that abides by the outline that I've set out for them is all that matters. And then we can heavily emphasize the feedback. For my graduate students, they're working toward a final project. I also offer the podcast option. I love it. If they want to write speculative fiction, that's great. If they want to do a graphic novel, welcome. All of it is welcome. And I also think that one of the benefits of a labor-based or contract-based grading structure is that it relieves them of the anxiety about the grade on the like A to F scale. And instead, I can focus on giving them meaningful feedback. It keeps me engaged. It permits them to take risks. Maybe the risks don't like succeed in terms of like the way that we traditionally would think of success, but they're risks worth taking. And so that's kind of how I've set up the semester.
So just to this point, Nicole, that Sarah's making about the mutual aid ethos and the contract-based grading, it indicates a rethink. Maybe Sarah, your mind may have already been in this way. I think for a lot of us, even those of us, speak for myself, who try to empathize with students. I'm not a person who tries to trip them up in the syllabus, and I don't know many faculty who are like that, frankly. But this time does demand something, even if you want it to be hard and say this has to be in and that has to be in. We're being confronted day by day, week by week, by things that most of us haven't seen before. And we're not in the classroom to experience those things in a personal space. How do you see the role of the higher ed instructor changing, either your own role or more broadly what you're hearing your colleagues going through?
Yeah, I really like, Sarah, how you talked about curating kind of a course for just seeing development of any sort. If you're focusing on research methods, that's kind of where I'm going with my course as well. If they can show that they can find a source on their own and say something about it and use another source to say that thing, that's pretty awesome right now. But radical empathy and radical transparency on both ends is so crucial, I've noticed. And I think with radical transparency, being able to say, like, you're doing this task because I want you to learn X, Y, and Z. And if you say that up front, kind of with your grading contract, Sarah, I think that it opens up that flexibility and students feel like they can take more risks, especially at different skill levels and having different backgrounds. It's so important. And then I think also having transparency about how we're doing as well. A lot of academia, I think, is a performance, performing that things are okay, especially in the wake of disaster. And I think being mindful and careful in certain moments is be like, oh, my toddler's in the room right now. Oh, here's my pet. Oh, I'm a little not feeling great today. How's everyone else feeling? This isn't the best day because of X, Y, and Z. Even those little moments, students, I think, open up and feel like they can be a little bit more transparent with you as well. Because a lot of these, everyone is going through a lot. All of the people that we interact with as instructors, they might be on the front lines. That was the case with some of my Drexel students. They were in the ER rooms working, and they were having a really tough time. And you have to demonstrate some kind of flexibility with this. And I wouldn't have known that unless they were transparent with me about that. And then with my ag students, they're also on the front lines. They're the ones that are producing the food right now. And there's some students on the other side who are food insecure. And I think that it's crucial to open up about all of our insecurities and fears right now, and bringing together this course or a class as a space to feel hope, and feel a community where you don't get that all the time.
Sarah, did you want to react to that? Good. I'm glad we got the proper
I hear somebody. Hello.
Atmospherics there. Yeah, right on cue.
Yeah.
Sarah, what do you think?
I was just going to say, the very first thing that I opened the semester with in both my courses is I said, I'm scared and let's do this anyway, and actually I showed a picture of my daughter, who is a very physically daring person, which I'm not. She is an 8-year-old who does high flying trapeze. And so, my PowerPoint slide is this picture of this little person with a mask on up against the blue sky. And I'm like, I'm scared. I'm scared when she does that, but I'm scared of this moment, and we're going to do it together anyway. So let's go, So
one of the things that we study in disaster research is convergence, compound disasters, the converging of people at disaster sites. We think there's a lot of theory in the sort of traditional disaster sociology literature. Historians have worked on this too. Public health researchers have worked on this too. So I think it's interesting at a sort of theoretical level, and we're going to learn a lot in this time about what happens when we find out that the disasters we've treated separately are not in any way usefully separable. But what hasn't been talked about, I think, nearly enough is the experience of the educator in that moment. Because again, I think we often, I'll speak for myself, if I'm creating a class and I do some damage to reality, but I do it for an analytical purpose, which is I say, let's focus on one aspect of Hurricane Katrina this week. Let's focus on another aspect of that. And I take as a given that the world is going to be more or less quiescent for more or less most of my students during the time that I'm teaching it. All that's out the window now. And to be teaching a COVID-19 course, which I also taught over the summer, that course really was a Black Lives Matter course. And after the first week, I tried to explain that to the students and where I was coming from. I kind of threw my hands up and I said, I can't tell you what I think about that. We just have to talk. We just have to experience this and talk about this and have an open. A lot of the class was open forum. And I just wanted to get some feedback from both of you, because you're thinking deeply about these issues, but that it seems there needs to be an openness to letting the disaster be what it is. And that is that it may literally be changing and evolving and exposing things you hadn't thought you were going to talk about in a class. Sarah, I'd like to hear from both of you on this if I could. Sarah, can I start with you?
Certainly. Thank you for asking. I have long had an interest in critical race theory, in critical theory, in examining racism as a public health issue, but I haven't been very confident in expressing that. I thought of myself more as a learner than a leader in this way. What I've been is a reader. And so when this moment presented itself as such, it was discernible to me, and I started kind of figuring out what the conversation was. For me, what I felt a responsibility to, so far as pedagogy, ethics, resistance, for example, resisting this ridiculous mandate from the White House about critical race theory that I wholesale refute it, not just for intellectual freedom, but because my students every single day live with the burden of racism and sexism and heterosexism. Anybody who is intellectually honest about climate change and the effects of climate change, about police brutality. And I say that as a faculty member in a school that has a criminal justice program, anyone who is intellectually honest about the pandemic has to be intellectually honest about the through line of racism across all of these things, of institutional racism, of white supremacy, even as the kind of conversation is framed out here about like my own anxiety that I'm not like producing enough research or being like the perfect instructor. That is a testament to how white supremacy sets up productivity as this aspirational goal above and beyond something like community care, and how it centers individualism against community care. And so I actually have been emboldened by the moment to be more out, I guess I would say, in terms of the influence of these essential philosophies on my teaching, on my parenting, on my volunteerism in the movement, including, you know, like this summer and even now, my daughter and my niece and my sister and my ex-husband, you know, and my stepdaughter, we are doing a variety of things in support of the movement because they feel essential to us, and we're doing them safely with masks, you know, all that stuff. And so I'm going kind of far afield, but I also think that your question invites us to commit intellectually and ethically to our values in the moment in a way that has been very clarifying, and means that we'll be able to say to the next generation, you know, here was the effort that we made in the moment. It is never enough, but it's all that we could do. You know, I'm like a really bad lapsed secular Jew, but there is that statement about, you know, you don't have to finish the work, but you have to start it, or, you know, commit to it somehow. And that's really, this is a very kind of like philosophical response that I'm giving you, but I think it's the question that you were asking.
It is, and I learned from your response. Thank you. Nicole, if you'd like to address that same question.
Yeah, just responding to some of the things that Sarah said, and kind of just re-emphasizing that all of these disasters are overlapping in such a way that it can be difficult to sometimes mitigate, but it's also important for us to recognize that we ourselves are in an insular community where we might be seeing these connections and interconnections and overlaps, but not everyone does. So with, for instance, the climate crisis, environmental health injustice, and health disparities, this may seem like clear connections to us as experts, but then in the classroom, it's important for us to demonstrate how those connections can be made quickly by a student who's looking at it on the surface. And it's the 1619 project and the controversy around that came out. The tweets that came out the same week that I had the 1619 project on the docket for my class at NC State. And 90% of the students in the class didn't know about this project, didn't know what it was for, and were skeptical of what it was meant to do. And as an instructor, I think it's also important, as we're all living in a really tumultuous time, really uncertain time, but also from very different backgrounds, to mediate challenging discussions across the aisle in a way that doesn't happen in our Congress and Senate right now. And that's really challenging. It takes a lot of flexibility and care and confidence. But I think as part of that, all of those things you were saying, Sarah, just also like teaching it, doing it, and also bringing out the care that comes with that.
Just to remind folks, you're listening to COVID Calls. We're talking with Nicole Welk-Jaeger and Sarah Raskin about teaching in COVID-19. We're almost up on time. I did want to try to get one more question in, and it really connects nicely with what you were just saying, Nicole. This sense of heightened responsibility, the role of the scholar in society at this time. Anybody who has a sort of expertise in any of the, which at this point I can't imagine anybody who's not qualified, is as complicated as this disaster is. But I wonder what you think about, you know, we still face these issues of inequality has been exposed at every level by the pandemic. And that also includes higher education. in terms of access, in terms of digital divide, in terms of students who do make it to college, and yet we make it so hard for them to succeed. All of that has been thrown into the open right now. I guess I'd like to hear from both of you how you're thinking about how your pedagogy can reach beyond the classroom. And it's a fair answer to say I haven't had time for that now, but I'm wondering what you even think about it, because I'll just say, like in history, we talk a lot about, we should all do public history. And then the pressures of our profession do everything it can to keep us from doing that, because it's politically risky in some parts of the country. To do it well, it's incredibly time consuming. You have to build relationships. And then what if you really like it and then you don't do your conventional scholarship and then you're not? So there's so many barriers to it. And yet I feel right now it's demanded, but I'm not quite sure how we maximize our potential in these spaces. I guess I'd like to hear what you're thinking about that. Sarah, what are your thoughts on that?
Well, I appreciate the question. I have at least two different thoughts. One is that I think, to me, one of the most heartening observations of the moment is how generous people are being. So you have literally been doing 133 episodes that themselves could be used for teaching in the future. I'm thinking of like Seamus Khan organizing all these sociologists to pre-record lectures that people can, I'm like, and of course the science, the collaborative science globally is. So I think that the generosity of people bringing their professional selves, the Under the Blacklight series from the African American Policy Forum, like there are so many resources that really allow this curatorial approach that can then kind of free us up to do different things in the future. So one of the ways that I think that we are doing it, not just can do it, but are doing it, is exactly what you're doing and exactly what other people are doing. And then I also think that, one has to think about the long games. So tenure is like a great kind of level set on that, right? Like there's this, progress toward tenure. And then if you get it, you're kind of locked in. And so, what are the activities that are worth the risk until you cross that moment? And then what are the activities that are kind of worth the risk beyond that, depending on, again, kind of going back to this like mutual aid ethos, like what can an associate professor get away with that an assistant can't? And also, depending on what kind of school you're in, are you in a SLAC where you're teaching a 3-3 and you really don't have the bandwidth to be doing public history, or can you integrate a project into the classroom? Like if I remember correctly, Nicole is going to do next semester on her syllabus. Or, for me, I'm in a deliberately community engaged research consortium. And I have a dean who supports research on social equity and racial equity. And so when I started talking with some folks at one of our local museums and other universities in Richmond about participating in a public history project, an oral history project of COVID, like I don't know what the scholarly legacy of that is going to be, but I think that the people who evaluate me internally, I know that they think it's a meritorious project. And of course, I've got to do all the other things. You've got to, publish and all that stuff. But I don't think it'll be seen as a distraction. I think it'll be seen as exemplifying community engagement. And I'm in a privileged position where I can use that privilege to drive these things forward. And then hopefully when I get tenure, I can do even more of them. So. Yeah.
I love how you're thinking multi-scalar from the individual class and the assignment out to the sort of broader professional commitments at this time. Nicole, I'd like to sort of pick your brain on this too and see how you're thinking about the scholar in the public sphere at this moment.
Yeah, I think Sarah spot on with talking about it starts in the classroom. We have to constantly remind ourselves, I think, that it's not an instructor-student relationship always. It's a colleague-to-colleague relationship. You're cultivating a potential future colleague, might not be in your field, but might be thinking critically in a similar way, or maybe challenging you in different ways. And for my students, I have them also gather oral histories from their families. And I'm really excited to do that at the NC State level because of the farm families around here. I think one of the things that I'm always thinking about is social media is a great way to get information across. And it's also a place where a lot of misinformation gets spread as well. And it's hard to mitigate, which I'll just plug. If you haven't done the Clemson University Spot the Troll quiz yet, please drop everything and do it now. Clemson University, spot the troll, really important social media practice. I had my students do it, and just not all of my students are on social media, and a lot of them have a lot of trouble getting online access. And so talking to people, and I think when we're thinking about public history, I think we need to think about it in different ways. There's different scales, but at the individual level, outside the classroom, just as a day-to-day person who's thinking critically, if you can have a challenging conversation with another person that's also that's also friendly and demonstrating empathy, I think can go a long way, especially in various different social circles. So social media, in person, thinking of reaching out in different ways, even printed media, printed newspapers. Don't forget, like I've been thinking a lot about this, especially with my background researching with Amish farmers. A lot of the information they get is from the agribusinesses that they interact with. So it's important to bear in mind who gets what kind of information and who's willing to listen, and waiting for those openings and going towards them.
You've been listening to COVID Calls, and you can catch COVID Calls every weekday at 5 p.m. Eastern Time. Tomorrow, please join me. I'll be talking with Kristen Urquiza, whose father, Mark Anthony Urquiza, died in the springtime. You may have heard her speak very movingly at the Democratic National Convention back in August. I'll be very happy to welcome her to COVID Calls tomorrow. And what a great, illuminating conversation today with Nicole Welk-Yeager and Sarah Raskin. Thank you both so much for your time and for your thoughts today.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you. This is great.
Stay healthy, everyone. We'll see you tomorrow, 5 o'clock.